Remember when there was no quick way to pick up a few items from the supermarket? Shoot, there were no supermarkets back in the good old days. Marianna Tull remembers those days when her family made the monthly trek to town to store up on staples. Step back with her in time and into the American store. But remember, there are no carts, no plastic, and payment is just cash, please.
If I need an onion, some Worcestershire sauce, or a loaf of bread, I think nothing of jumping in my car, driving the 8 or 10 blocks to my Acme, tossing the necessary items in my cart, getting in the express line, and presto, I'm ready to go home. Like everything else, grocery shopping as I knew it 70-odd years ago no longer exists. Thank goodness. When my mother needed only 5 pounds of sugar in a hurry, Mr. Montgomery's general store, only 2 miles away, filled the bill. But once a month, my mother needed to replenish the basics. Then we would make a trip to the nearest town and my mother's favorite place to shop, the American store. The nearest town was 7 miles away, and at a top speed of maybe 25 miles an hour, depending on whether we traveled in my father's Model T or my aunt's 7-passenger Hudson, the trip was a real adventure and practically an all-day affair. My mother never failed to stop at the drugstore first. I always hoped it would go out of business. It was there that my mother bought a bottle of that disgusting cod liver oil each month. I never figured out a way to get out the back door every morning without her confronting me with a tablespoon of that dreaded good-for-you stuff. Then it was across the street to the American store. We always tried to hit a time of day when the store was not busy. Otherwise, we had to stand in line and wait. There were no more than 3 male clerks in long white aprons working behind the high wooden counter that stretched the length of the store. The shelves behind the counter reached almost to the ceiling and were piled high with boxes, bags, and cans. My mother's purchases were usually limited to packaged things such as sugar, flour, and baking powder, and boxed products such as hot cereals, cream of wheat, and rolled oats, all of which I hated with a passion. I sat and cried many a morning at the breakfast table, but to no avail. I had to eat the stuff even if it got stone cold and stiff. One of the things that intrigued me most was watching the clerk retrieve a box that was way beyond his reach. He used a long wooden pole with a clever contraption on the end. When he squeezed the metal lever on his end of the pole, a metal claw closed around the box he wanted high on the shelf. The box would come hurtling down, and the clerk would attempt to catch it. It was good practice for him if he played catcher on the Sunday school baseball team. If my mother wanted cheese, the clerk would lift a large glass cover from a huge round of cheese on a wooden plate. He was usually quite expert at guessing where to make the cut for the 1.5 pounds my mother requested. Then he wrapped the slice in heavy white paper. Butter, which never came in quarters, milk, cottage cheese, and other dairy products were kept in a huge refrigerator at the back of the store. My mother seldom needed any of this. Our old Jersey cow kept us well supplied. We had never heard of frozen vegetables or fruits. Such foods were offered only in dried or canned form, or fresh. But my mother had cupboards brimming with home-canned vegetables and fruits, not to mention jams and jellies of all kinds, plus fruit juices and relishes. Now, don't forget the coffee. It was ground to order in a big, noisy iron machine. Cookies were displayed in large, square metal boxes with glass in the lids. My mother never looked at them as she baked her own. But occasionally, if I looked pitiful enough, she would buy 3 or 4 of the cookies I adored. Today they would make me queasy, all marshmallow, coconut, food coloring, and not much cookie. The clerk was armed with plenty of slips of paper and a pencil, and noted the price of each item as he placed it on the counter. Then, finally, he showed off his talent in addition. Now it was time to go across the store to the glass cases brimming with all kinds of tempting meats. My mother was interested mainly in fresh beef, roast, steaks, and hamburger, which was ground right before our eyes. I loved to watch the fresh red strings of meat come drooling out of the machine. Lamb was another tasty item in which she indulged. Every roast or steak was cut to order. Since my father butchered 2 pigs every fall, pork products never made the grocery list. My mother usually raised a few turkeys, and since the hen house was full, we didn't need roasters, fryers, stewers, or eggs. No grocery store sold seafood, but occasionally we would treat ourselves to something from the little fish market around the corner from the grocery. But the pickings were slim and expensive. Fish and seafood were too perishable to be shipped any distance. The butcher presented us with another slip showing the total for our meat. Then came the final step. At the end of the meat counter, they had constructed a small cage-like enclosure in which Miss Garber, the cashier, reigned. I felt so important when I was allowed to hand the slips and money through the little opening. We were now set for another month. The cars we drove had no trunks, so we were surrounded by paper bags full of groceries on the trip home. But wait a minute. We have to stop at the ice house before leaving town. Our refrigerator needs a refill. But where in the heck are we going to put a 100-pound block of ice? It's going to be a cold ride home.
Most of us back in the good old days had a fairly solid upbringing in things spiritual. We had bedtime prayers, grace at meals, Bible reading, Sunday school, and church to keep us on the straight and narrow. My mama and daddy had much the same mind as Evelyne Lein's did. To them, life was sacred, and our time was our life. Therefore, every day was the Lord's Day.
In the 30s, social life for Mama and Papa revolved around the church and its activities. We children fell naturally into this pattern. None of us thought of missing church or Sunday school except for taking to our beds. Papa served as deacon or trustee for most of his years. This once-a-month church board meeting sometimes necessitated driving home from his distant road job. He might have been a few minutes late, but he kept his attendance a priority. Mama sang in the choir, so she never sat with us in church. She always refused to sing a solo. Instead, Mama offered her solos at home, in the yard, kitchen, while milking the cows, or driving a car. Mama said, "The cows let down their milk better when I sing." She prided herself on reaching high C. Sometimes my brothers teased Mama by yodeling their version of high C, which subsequently started the dogs howling. Frequently, I heard Mama give out her renditions of Whispering Hope and In the Sweet By and By when I played way down our road at my friend Katie's house. Mama belonged to the Ladies' Aid and served on various church committees such as Altar Guild. She had the beautiful attribute of letting her goodness spill out of church into personal charitable projects. Perhaps few people ever knew about these except me, whom she always brought along on her errands of mercy. Somehow she found out about those needy families, and every outgrown garment from her family found another owner. Friends and relatives saved their cast-offs for her to distribute. A box in the attic held her needy clothes. She had only to rummage through the washed and mended items to find the right fit for a desperate person. Food went along with the clothes, be it fresh garden produce or a jar or two of canned fruit. She might even tuck in a dozen eggs or a lard pail of milk. I complained then about carrying the stuff to the car for our charitable trips. Now I feel privileged to have been a part of it, remembering her goodness. She lived the Lord's parable of the Good Samaritan, recognizing all people as her neighbors. One evening in the dead of winter, the fire truck siren wailed closer to our part of town. Running outside, someone called, "Kroner's house is on fire." We pulled on overshoes and heavy coats and ran 3 blocks to the blaze. Mr. and Mrs. Kroner were elderly. Mrs. Kroner was confined to a wheelchair. They lost their house and all their possessions, but came home with Mama that night. In 2 days, Papa had arranged to tow a cookhouse, which had been used for his road construction crew in summer, to a nearby site. The structure was smaller, but similar to a small mobile home today. When banked with boards and tar paper, it became snug and warm. Mama seemed to be everywhere, giving orders to her family. She enlisted us to carry provisions from the attic: clothes, linens, sugar, oatmeal, and other foodstuffs. To this day, I can visualize Mama, her sleeves rolled up, washing down the inside and stocking the shelves and drawers in the cookhouse. The Croners had a warm place to sleep and a place to cook and eat. I also recall how this old couple hugged Mama and shed tears as they entered their new home. No doubt about it, Mama and Papa lived out their religious beliefs. Every day was the Lord's day. Papa taught us simple prayers and read to us from the Bible. My first day in Sunday school is a vivid memory. We sang such hymns as Jesus Loves Me and We Are Precious Jewels, Stars in His Crown. When we were 13 or 14, we were expected to take confirmation instruction, or reading for the minister, as it was called, and then take our vows. The thought never entered our minds not to be confirmed. In our town in the Midwest, every teenager read for the minister. Upon completing our 3-year study, the class set for examination in front of the congregation. There were 6 such sessions. How frightened we were that we might draw a blank, fumble an answer, or forget the creed when the pastor quizzed us on our now-closed catechisms. Confirmation Sunday finally arrived for our class of 12, 5 girls and 7 boys. We girls donned new white confirmation dresses. The boys sported new suits and ties. Each carried a new Bible given to us by the congregation. We sang our class song, "O Jesus, I Have Promised." A short blessing by the pastor followed as we stood silently before the altar, then kneeled to receive our first communion from the single silver chalice. The beautiful sanctuary of our church lifted our thoughts higher and imparted reverence. The large hand-carved altar, each spire in the shape of a cross, was lighted with 14 candles. In a carved-out center niche stood the almost life-size statue of Christ, his arms outstretched. 2 huge side windows, perhaps 10 feet wide by 15 feet high, were made of colorful stained glass and depicted beautiful life-size scenes, one of Christ kneeling in the garden and the other of the angel by the empty tomb. Smaller stained glass windows lined the rest of the church and reflected more light and loveliness. No wonder we who were privileged to experience this day will always remember this beautiful and solemn ceremony in such an inspirational setting. However, Confirmation Day also brings to mind a rather humorous event, and it certainly gave the congregation something to discuss later. After the pastor blessed each of us, we returned to our pews in the front of the church. Suddenly, we girls heard a creak, a board gave way, and down went our bench with us onto the floor. The Reverend's eyes were upon us instantly, severely at first. Then an accepting smile spread across his face as he continued with the next group of communicants at the altar. We giggled, then filed in as dignified a manner as possible to another pew. Of course, embarrassment was our only injury. After confirmation, I was eligible to join the choir with Mama. She had coached me in voice at home, and from listening to her sing, I knew most of the words of the anthems. My sister and I were usually asked to sing duets for various functions at the church, and soon became a popular duo. Sometimes we squabbled over the choice of hymns, but once underway, our voices blended harmoniously. Attending Luther League, a young people's organization, added inspirational instruction and social activities every Sunday night. In addition, most of the town's churches scheduled Tuesday school. On Tuesday afternoons, the majority of students were excused from public school to attend religious classes held in their respective churches. I cannot recall any ruckus over taxpayers' money not being put to good use on those afternoons, and nobody sued the school over an issue of the separation of church and state. Papa and Mama did their religious duty, but we never felt pressured with religion or deprived of other things because of it. We learned a solid, all-encompassing reliance on our Heavenly Father, and faith grew in our maturing minds. We would need this uncomplicated faith in the years to come, the war years. Most of all, Papa and Mama assumed the responsibility for training us in the way we should go, the Lord's way.
In the days when there was so much need all around us, many had to extend a hand to help a neighbor, even if we didn't know them. John Lansdale remembers just such an experience in A Helping Hand.
During the 30s and early 40s, worldly goods and monetary means were in short supply, yet we had an abundance of love and friendship. People cared for each other and went out of their way to extend a helping hand to those less fortunate. It was an era of kindness and compassion that eased the dark days of the Depression. One example of such kindness stands out in my memory. My dad had bursitis in his shoulder, and for more than a year never slept in his bed due to the pain, but sat up in his recliner chair and grabbed what sleep he could. In those days, doctors made house calls and took the time to sit and visit. One evening, Dr. Sam related an incident. He had received a call at a late hour to go out in the country and tend a patient. It was autumn. There was a definite chill in the air, and a light mist was falling. As Dr. Sam was returning to his home, he saw a man standing in the road trying to hitch a ride. So, Doc stopped and picked him up. On their drive into town, the man told Doc that he had a wife and 5 children, and try as he might, he had not been able to find employment. His family had no heat or food, and he was at his wits' end. Doc told him that he knew of a farmer who had lost his handyman and was looking for someone to help on the farm. Doc said he would call the farmer in the morning, but he was sure that with his recommendation, the man would have a job. He gave the man the farmer's address and $10 to tide him over so that he could get some food for his family, saying he could pay him back when he got the job and was working. The man thanked Doc and told him he would repay the loan as soon as he could. Then, with tears in his eyes, he told Doc that when he got into his car, he had planned to kill him, take his car and money, and flee with his family. He gave Doc his handgun as tears streamed down his face. My dad had tears in his eyes as Doc told the story. The WPA and CCC finally gave individuals in need employment and allowed them to maintain their dignity. We had no such thing as welfare, and had we had it, most of the poor would have been too proud to accept it. Today, although we are an affluent society, welfare has become a way of life for some. Along the way, we lost so much that was important in the good old days: pride, dignity, and self-respect. Doctors no longer make house calls, and the helping hand outstretched to a neighbor is hard to find. How fortunate I was to see this country and its people at their pinnacle of love and kindness to their fellow man.
Religion, to those of us raised in the good old days, was more than just going to church. It was helping out fire victims like Evelyne Lein's parents did. It was helping out a down-and-out hitchhiker like Dr. Sam did. It was seeing the Creator in every star, every flower, every laugh, every tear. Edward Colwell penned this poem as he looked throughout the creation and saw God's footprints.
Did you see this morning's sunrise? Did you see it set last night? Have you seen the striking wonder of a shooting star in flight? Have you seen the flowers of beauty in which our lands abound? These are merely footprints, God's footprints all around. Have you seen a baby smiling or heard its laughter ring? Have you felt soft rains from heaven and watched wild birds a-wing? Have you heard the forest whisper or harked the ocean sound? These too are merely footprints, God's footprints all around. When a hand in friendship's offered, when a smile comes your way, or someone speaks a kind word in passing time of day, when a tiny seed starts growing and pushes through the ground, these are just a few more signs of God's footprints all around.
So that brings us full circle back to where we began, Thanksgiving. Giving thanks for the great bounty another harvest season brought, Don Buchan and his family faced some pretty tough times. World War I was raging, and Brother Ed was somewhere in France. A blizzard raged outside, but inside their home all was peaceful. Go back to a much simpler time as Don relates his story of Thanksgiving, 1918.
It was a Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving in 1918. Miss Fisher, our fourth-grade teacher in the West School, was busy at the blackboard, writing sentences and underlining the subjects and verbs. The hissing of the steam radiators made us drowsy, and I glanced idly out of the window and snapped out of my lethargy. The large, soft flakes of snow that swirled out of the northwest held promise of a heavy snowfall. There would be no school until Monday, and I rejoiced. Snow meant snow forts and snowball fights, and perhaps a snowman, and a game of fox and geese with the neighborhood kids. Miss Allen, the principal, brought her heavy body into the room on tiptoe and whispered to Miss Fisher, and walked out with every eye on her. Each of us sensed an event of importance would follow, and waited in hushed expectancy. "Clear your desk," Miss Fisher said. "There's a blizzard coming out of the northwest, and it has already reached Sioux Falls over in South Dakota. The teachers who are going home over the holiday have trains to catch, and with a snowstorm coming, they want to get packed at once." A gasp of joy swept the room, and there were grins of exultation on the face of every boy, and even some of the girls smiled in anticipation. We crowded through the doorway into the hall where other kids were skipping around in sheer joy at the prospect of an extra half-day holiday. I walked home with Irving England, as always, and we scooped up handfuls of soft snow and threw it at each other. His dog Spot leaped and bounded and barked and whined and chased his tail, showing in every way possible that he was glad to see his lord and king. We separated at my home, for Irving lived a block east. "Maybe we can go hunting tomorrow," he said. "Maybe we can track a rabbit in the snow." Mother met me at the door. "You'd better get a scarf on to cover your face, and get your sled. The way the sky looks, we may be in for a real blizzard, and you'll have to go to the grocery store for me right away." I raced into the basement and got my flexible flyer, last year's Christmas gift. By the time I had dragged the sled to the front door, the wind whipped the snow in gusts and took my breath away. The soft flakes were fast becoming icy pellets, and stung when they hit my face. The northwest wind had increased in velocity, and I exulted, for I could pretend I was an old trapper dragging his belongings behind him on a homemade sled. I met Mother at the door. "Here's the list," she said. "I forgot the sage for dressing, but you can remember that. And onions. I want good firm ones. Here's the money. Don't lose the change. If Mr. Kruger needs to telephone so there won't be a mistake, you know our phone number, 312. I trod a block, an old grizzled trapper racing to the shelter of his crude log cabin. Then I went slowly, a hunter lost in the wilderness, hoping to find an Indian village where I could share a wigwam until the storm blew itself out. When Mr. Groover had filled the order, I loaded it on the sled and trotted home, a trapper in the far north, fleeing from hostile Indians. At home, Mother checked everything against her list, carefully counted the change, noted the price of each item, and sucked in her breath with a whistling sound as she said, "I don't know what the world is coming to. Prices are getting too high." Together we went to the hen house. Mother selected a fat hen and had me hold it by the feet, while she tested a couple of others by feeling of their breast. She discarded two as unworthy to grace a Thanksgiving Day table, but found others that suited her purpose. Because of the war, that was World War I, the big war, we had wheatless days and meatless days. Wheatless days started on Wednesday, October 24th, and on all Wednesdays we were to eliminate all bread and pastries containing wheat flours and substitute corn, rye, tapioca, rice, or potato flour. Meatless days began on Tuesday, October 30th, and on Tuesdays all housewives were to eliminate beef, pork, and veal, using instead eggs, poultry, and seafood. In addition, France was facing a sugar famine in 1918, and all Americans were requested to cut sugar consumption 1/3. Flour was not sold in quantities exceeding 1 bag, and retail profit on flour was not to exceed 25 cents a bag. There was a ceiling price of 10 cents a pound on sugar, and all sales were limited to 2 pounds. "I used what little wheat flour I had to bake buns," Mother said. "There'll be no mince or pumpkin pie this Thanksgiving. I'll make a fruit salad instead. Oranges, apples, and bananas, and nut meats." Then she sighed, and a tear rose silently down her cheeks. I knew she was thinking of my eldest brother Ed, who was somewhere in France. I remembered I had something to do in the basement. I was afraid I'd cry too, and I was far too big for that. My brothers and sisters came home bursting into the house breathless and laughing. "Shake your coats out on the porch," Mother said, "and hang them up. They'll be wet when the snow melts." The next morning I had forgotten the proposed trip along the river with Irving. Likely he had too, and like me he was at home in the kitchen, fascinated, watching his mother prepare the Thanksgiving dinner. There were the 2 hens, roast to a golden brown and stuffed with sage and dressing. There was crisp celery, mashed potatoes, and gravy, as only a mother could make. There was a fruit salad with bits of delicious fruit enveloped in real whipped cream. There were homemade watermelon and pickles, and ever so many other tidbits that we recall when we think of Thanksgiving dinner at home. Father sat at the head of the table and talked of his real estate business. "Corn jumped to $2.40, he said, and a farm sold for $325 an acre. I don't know what it's coming to. And this infernal new income tax. Of course, it's only for the duration of the war. Folks wouldn't stand for an income tax for long. Why, every unmarried man with an income of $1,000 has to give part of it to the government, and a married man with $2,000 pays too. They claim that 444 folks right here in Clay County will have to pay a tax on income this year." "It's the war," Mother said. "We've got a lot to be thankful for." Then she turned to her children, beginning with the oldest and asking each in turn, "What do you have to be thankful for this year?" My eldest sister set the pattern, and we all followed on the same subject. Brother Ed in France. "I'm thankful Ed is safe." Another added, "I'm thankful Ed got the box we sent." As the youngest, I finished it around rather haltingly. "I'm thankful that he hasn't been captured or wounded or anything." After dinner, when we were as stuffed as the birds had been, we went into the living room, and Mother allowed us to light a fire in the fireplace. Father hitched the chair over to one side and then selected a book, Uncle Charlie's Poems. The author, once an actor, had been paralyzed. He didn't give up, and with the help of 2 nurses, made a livelihood by writing poetry. Perhaps they didn't compare with those of Lowell and Longfellow, but they had an air of nostalgia, and Father loved them. "Read one out loud," we begged. Of course Father agreed, cleared his throat, and announced, "The title is When Father Carved the Turk." I remembered the first stanza. "We had a turkey on our farm, and I'd oft hear Paul remark, he'd pledge his word that very bird came out of Noah's Ark." Another verse went, "We chloroformed the gobbler, and though for hours we tried, no axe or gun, and we tried a ton, could penetrate his hide." Memory fails me here, but the turkey slipped off the plate onto the visiting preacher's lap, and gravy splattered on the guest. We thought it was hilarious. So we finished Thanksgiving Day, listening to Father recite Uncle Charlie poems. This is a simple story because Thanksgiving was far simpler in the good old days. We went to bed in peace, happy and content. By the time the next Thanksgiving rolled around, Ed was home from over there, and we had all the more to be thankful for.
Till next time, this is Ken Tate for the Good Old Days audio collection, reminding you to always remember the best, and God bless.